husband dating men from the US military, being South African, lobola, mahadi, approval from the US military. I moved in with him. My green card. I could no longer work as an ESL teacher here in South Korea. Why we're still here in South Korea? Plan of moving to the US. Hello good people, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't already know, my name is Sila, but you can call me Shirley. So I was an ESL teacher living and working in South Korea, but as this video will further explain, I am now simply a girl living in South Korea. I came to South Korea in 2022 with the intention of teaching, traveling, and just basically living my best black girl life, you know? About a year into it, I met my now husband on Hinge. And despite all the warnings we received against dating men from the US military, him and I immediately hit it off and started dating. About a year and some change into the relationship, we started discussing our future together and our serious intentions to get married. Now, because he's in the military, he had to continually extend his DROS. DROS is basically the estimated date he's expected to return home from his assignment, which was here in South Korea at the time. But on top of that, me being South African, we couldn't simply run to the courthouse, sign some papers and call it a day. I had to explain to him that in my culture, when a man wants to marry a woman, he has to approach her family and enter into negotiations to pay lobola, mahadi, or what you would call in English, a dowry or bride price. Of course, because we were both living and working in South Korea, we had to begin these negotiations over a phone call with my family. A very unorthodox way, but it had to be done. And honestly, that was only the beginning of a very, very long process to come. As I'll explain in another video, maybe if you're interested, you can let me know in the comments. Getting married as a foreigner to a US military member is an extremely long process. Before we could even get married, we first had to start with getting approval from the US military. That involves gathering a whole lot of documents and putting together what they called a marriage packet. And once they sign it off, we basically have the approval. These documents included me getting a PCC, a police clearance certificate, which in other countries they call a police background check, and a letter of non-impediment, which proves that you are not already married. As you know, if you are South African, trying to attain these documents from back home can take pretty long, especially when you're not there yourself. You will either ask a family member or employ an agency that does these on your behalf. But it doesn't mean it's gonna take a few weeks to get here. Especially in my case, it took a few months, unfortunately. Anyway, after months of waiting to get the documents, to then put the marriage packet together, finally get the approval from the US military as well as my family, we were finally ready to go ahead and sign and be officially married. Without any official celebrations or ceremonies, we went down to the courthouse, which here in Korea is actually your community center. We are here. I think our process is definitely going to come with its tricky tricks. They've probably never done it for two foreigners. We officiated our marriage and About a week or so later, I moved in with him.
And that is it for me and Money Villa. Another end of another era. Saying goodbye to my second apartment here in South Korea. Sure. It's been a long day. Goodbye, second home. You were really good to me. One of my faves. I'm gonna miss you.
So that should answer why I'm no longer living in the apartment you've previously seen me record vlogs in. So after that long process of trying to get married, we could now start working on getting my green card. I needed the green card because his next assignment was in the United States. So it was important that I apply for permanent residence and not try and go to the US on a 6-month visa or whatnot. And you know how tricky things are currently in the United States of America. Now that process of trying to get a green card also came with its own,
let's say, difficulties and complications,
which I can definitely go into more detail about in another video. Again, just let me know in the comments and I'll explain the full process of attaining a US green card, especially while living in a foreign country. I think that's important as well. However, for me to apply for a green card, I had to move, or let me not say move, but change visas. When you are applying for a green card as the spouse of a US military member, especially in a foreign country, you need to be on a SOFA status visa. Let me quickly read exactly what a SOFA status visa is. It stands for the Status of Forces Agreement Visa. Basically, it's the visa dependents of US military members need while living in a host country like South Korea. It proves that you're in the country under military sponsorship. So the US embassy basically wants to see that I am here with him as his dependent, and it is only due to the US military that we are here, even though I wasn't necessarily here for that reason. But now that we were married, that has to now become the reason if we want to apply for the green card. I hope that makes sense. So this basically meant that I had to give up my E2 teaching visa. And I think you know where I'm going with this. So technically, I could no longer work as an ESL teacher here in South Korea. Now, we already knew that this was eventually going to happen because we were expecting to leave South Korea and move to the United States for his new assignment. So I knew I was gonna have to eventually resign from my job. So yes, this is why I'm no longer teaching here in South Korea and I am simply a girl living here in South Korea. But now that we have established why I'm no longer working, why I'm no longer living in the old apartment, let's now discuss why we're still here in South Korea. So like I mentioned earlier, this process is lengthy. We first had to secure interview dates at the US Embassy, which also came with its own lengthy processes. And we were trying as hard as possible to make sure we got the interview dates before his DROS dates, which had already been continuously extended from the time we began dating, him and I wanting to spend more time together, as well as once we were married and decided that we want to spend the rest of our lives together, those dates also kept being extended. Eventually, we got our first interview date, and as much as it came with a few unexpected twists and turns, it actually went pretty well, thankfully. And we passed it. Then we moved on to applying for our second interview date. That one also went pretty well. Everything went smoothly. We had all the correct documents, answered all our questions perfectly, but ran into one minor problem, which forced us to then put the whole process on pause. And unfortunately for us, that became a huge problem for the whole plan of moving to the US. Because without the green card process being completed, I could not move to the US with my husband permanently. Also, we couldn't necessarily separate because by that time I had already resigned from my job. So I was already fully dependent on him. I know. And going to the United States on a tourist visa would not have been the best option at the time, because with the way things currently are, we were better off waiting to get the green card or not going at all. So my husband informed his leadership, and after weeks of going back and forth, they finally agreed to extend his assignment here in South Korea for another year. So that should explain why I am still here in South Korea. Now, what's next for me? Funny enough, we had that all figured out when we initially thought we were moving to the US. And listen, being fully dependent on a man has never been a desire of mine. The plan was always for this to be temporary until we got settled in the US. But now that I unexpectedly have all this time on my hands, I've really been leaning into content creation, which is something that I've always really enjoyed anyway. And honestly, this season is giving me just the time I need to see how far I can really take it. So if you haven't already, please remember to like this video, leave a comment, share, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it, and it helps more than you probably realize. At the same time, I've also been dusting off my CV/resume and trying to see what opportunities are available to me out there while I figure out what my future looks like. So much about our lives has changed so quickly. When I first moved here in 2022, I could have never imagined my life turning out this way. But despite all the uncertainty, twists, and changes, I'm genuinely so grateful. I'm grateful that I met my life partner. I'm grateful for all the wonderful experiences I've had, both individually and with him. And I think my story is proof that God really has a funny way of showing you that your plans have nothing to do with what He's paved for your future. Now, if you've stayed this far, then clearly I'm doing something right. So subscribe if you want to keep up with my journey, because at this point, I've got no excuse but to remain consistent. I shall keep the content coming. You'll definitely be getting more up-to-date content from me. And if there's anything specific you'd like to know about my life here in Korea or life in Korea generally, please leave your comment down or your question down in the comments. And if you have any further questions about marriage, getting married as a foreign spouse here in South Korea, the green card process, also feel free to leave your questions down in the comments. Let's stay connected. You can follow me at Shirley's 30s on Instagram, and that's where you'll also get the blow-by-blow daily updates of what I'm doing here in Korea. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will see you on our next video next Sunday, same time.